Hey everybody, this week's sponsor are my friends over at imprinteasy.com. If you go to imprinteasy.com/dope and sign up for the thing on the page, you can get a free pen, and it's lovely. They are known for great effective printing and branding solutions, so go check them out.
Drums, please.
H-I-L-L-Y, North, West, South, West, South Side, right, H-I-Y, yeah, now here it is.
All right, everyone, welcome to the show, and today I have Victoria Teasdale with me. Say hello, Victoria.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Yes, an absolute pleasure. Finally, glad we can finally do this. So, yeah, just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and if you've dealt with any kind of mental health issues in your life that you'd like to talk about.
Okay. Well, I am from the north of England, up in Yorkshire, and yeah, I'm an empowerment coach. I help people with self-discovery. And basically, it stems from my own struggles as I went through life. I started off as quite your average child, quite bright, but yeah, I always seemed to have some form of struggle. Something was holding me back. Mm-hmm. And it started off, with the odd little physical thing, but then it very quickly became emotional in nature. My mood was all over the place. I became quite depressed, but as teenagers do, I never really talked about it to anybody, really. I kept it in, and the anxiety as well. It wasn't until I got to adulthood where I really figured out that I wasn't just struggling with emotions as well, but I was struggling with attention, and I was struggling with my concentration. And yeah, at the same time, I was not fitting into any of the standard boxes. So we already knew that normal was not a thing for me. I don't believe in normal anyway, but it certainly was not a label that anybody wished to apply to me. But neither was I fitting into any specific diagnosis or box of any other manner, which caused quite a lot of distress, because I don't know how things work over there in the US, but if you don't fit into a box here in the UK, you don't actually qualify for any form of support. And so you're pretty much left alone to go it alone. And that's very much what I did. I managed to drag myself through qualifications. I did stress consultancy, and then I went on to do life coaching and health and lifestyle trainer course. And what that gave me is it gave me a great insight into, it put me on the first steps towards mindset, and how you've got a great deal of control over the thoughts that you think. And it gave me that link between what you think and how you feel. Right. But it wasn't enough. And still, I had no answers. And still, I was seeking the correct label to find the correct tribe. Because I believe that if I could find the right label and find the right tribe, they will help me understand, and they will give me the answers I needed to be able to become the successful person that I knew I had. I knew I had it in me. So once I got into coaching, I realized that I wasn't the only person out there that was having this, I don't quite fit into any of the boxes issue. But unfortunately, it was too little too late for me. And my life by this point had pretty much started to fall apart dramatically. And I wasn't just struggling myself, but my third child, he was also having very similar problems to me, but his behavior was off the charts. And we were brought to our knees as a family. And what that resulted in was I had three mental health breakdowns in quick succession. Now, in a way, it was a good thing. Right. It was horrific to go through. And believe me when I say that I never realized. I mean, you see all these movies and you see it described on Wikipedia, all these things that the human brain is capable of doing in crisis. But until you actually experience these things, it is quite frightening. to actually go through. But whilst I was in the rehab centre where I was taking respite away from all the pressures of everyday life, something occurred to me, and that was that seeking the labels was probably the wrong thing to do. Now, I have studied human biology, and I knew that we were genetically 99% all the same. But what I don't think people realize is that how vast the human genome is. And when you do the math on that, for each variation in the genome that you might be different from the next person, that equates to 30 million potential differences at a genetic level. So even though we're 99% the same, that still leaves us with a massive amount of potential for being completely different from the next person.
Right.
And so what I focused my time on in there was really getting to know who I was. And one of the questions they asked me in there was, do you have a good sense of identity, Victoria? And I looked at myself and I realized that outside of being a mother and being a wife and being a daughter and a sister, I didn't actually have a great idea of who I was. I'd kind of piled on all these interests and things that, you know, that I collected almost because people told me I was good at them, but I never really had a great deal of interest into some of them. Right. So during that time, I really dug deep, and it was at that point I developed the method of coaching that I've gone on to use with my clients. And I unpicked not only the values that I have, the passions that I have, the interests that I have, but I also dug deep into the little individual quirks that make me different on a level of functioning. So I looked at the way that I function on a physical level, and I looked at the way that I function on an emotional level, a cognitive level, on a way that on the level that I communicate with other beings. And I very quickly built this picture of what my strengths were, but also what my challenges were. And out of those strengths and challenges, I built this enormous living document which describes my needs, my dynamic needs, but it forms a basis that I can always go back to whenever I'm feeling like my well-being is suffering in any of those areas. And that in turn had a knock-on effect of building up my confidence. I'd attempted confidence as a coach before, and people have always said to me, you know, if you don't feel confident, fake it until you make it. And I was like, okay, yeah, I can do this, but it never felt particularly great. It always led to burnout if ever I tried to keep it up for too long. But
right, it's like you're trying to pretend to be someone else.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And it's like you're constantly acting. It's like you're constantly in a movie role. You're not, it's not you, it's not your authentic self. You don't feel relaxed around people enough to be your authentic self. Right. Do you even know who your authentic self is? Not to this level of clarity that you need for that kind of natural confidence. And so, yeah, what I was able to do then was to bring that to the table with my coaching clients, but also with my own family. We developed this wonderful way of looking at life, not through a lens of diagnoses, because when you're a 5-year-old, they don't want to give any diagnoses out for various different reasons. And so it became quite frustrating. But once we switched then to looking at our 5-year-old's needs, specific needs, not just sort of rough area kind of needs, specific needs, and we figured out how to meet those needs. He has gone from being a child who would literally he'd get himself into these angry states through no sort of fault of anybody's. He would just literally flip into them. He'd turn around and sort of growl at you when you were doing a jigsaw with him. And then he'd start trying to do bizarre things like throw himself through a glass door, to becoming this wonderfully loving child who, you know, he would hold his concentration, and he was so calm and so positive and so helpful because we had, you know, we'd gone through this process, and some of the needs he had were quite obscure, and they're not things that you would necessarily think of, even you know, even as a coach. Even some of the parenting classes that we went through on our journey, they never, you know, came across such needs in a child before. So yeah, so that's my journey. And once I had that detailed understanding of my needs, what actually happened was I was very clear. And when I went to the doctors and I described my experience and I described my needs with such clarity, instead of just saying, oh, this is happening and this is happening and I don't know what's going on, they were then able to give me the labels that I needed to access the support. So I actually ended up with 5 full-on diagnoses, 3 of which were an individual disability by their own right. And if I hadn't have got that clarity, because they were all intermingled with each other, I would never have teased all of those apart and received that support that I needed.
Yeah, it seems that personalization in all forms of therapy or coaching or communication, working with kids, it seems like personalization is something that has been missing for a very long time. And it seems a lot of people are jumping into the coaching space to sort of fulfill the needs that others need that they've kind of missed themselves at a younger age. And now we want to help people to see the ability to help themselves and to help others a lot sooner, and not necessarily just filter through an education system or a way of being, or having them fall into these boxes, but realize that, like you're saying, everyone is genetically encoded differently, and that we need to pay more attention to those specifics. Now it's hard because you know, money and social things and politics, and that makes it difficult. But it seems a lot more people are taking it more personally and into their hands, becoming coaches, becoming therapists, things of that nature, to help people to do that. Would you say that's accurate, that we're trying to kind of help move the needle and fulfill that sort of destiny?
Absolutely. And that is really the reason why I chose to specialize in helping bridge that gap between the labels and the needs. And really some of the most fulfilling experiences of my life have been the times where I've gone into school and I've spoken to teachers and I've said to them, and they've said to me, oh, this child doesn't qualify for help because he doesn't have X part of such whatever diagnosis. And I'm like, okay, but that does not change the fact that he struggles with communication, and he struggles with his energy levels, and he struggles with his his concentration and his memory. And I would like to know how whether, regardless of what label you give him, he's always going to struggle with that. Can you tell me what you're going to do to meet those needs for that child? Because I think when the hidden problems, as cognitive problems are, and emotional problems are, and some physical problems really, we don't, we're not conditioned to look for those. We're not conditioned to accept them. And the awareness isn't there, especially outside of the realm of coaching. And so spreading this knowledge can be one of the most empowering things, not just for the people who have the challenges, but also the people who work with people who have the challenges. Because when they start changing their mindset and they talk to other people, it's almost like a kind of virus. Everybody starts sharing this knowledge and seeing the transformation that happens to these adults and these children when you really start meeting their needs instead of labeling them. that really is some of the most rewarding work that I've been into happy tears more times in the past few months than I have in my entire life.
Oh,
And that is saying something.
yeah, that is fantastic. What I really love is part of it is at some point you mentioned that the patient, for lack of a better word, um, is eventually empowered. You know, they're given the freedom and the ability to describe fully and uninhibitedly what is going on in their psyche or in their life or in their mind, um, in multiple ways, and we're allowed to finally empower people to do that. And that seems like the point where growth really happens, when the person who is trying to help them is able to get in touch with who they are, but the person who is getting helped feels a sense of empowerment and comfort and ability to say, like, yes, this is a difficulty I'm facing, and I have the power to find ways to grow and change and become better. And there's no shame in that. You know, we're all constantly fighting some sense of shame throughout our lives, and to remove
Absolutely.
those chains is amazing.
Absolutely. And shame has been a big part of my life, certainly. And a lot of my clients also have voiced the same opinion, is that when you have the hidden problems that are not well known, and once I started doing the research into the psychology of this and the neurobiology of this, it became very shocking just how many variations there are to the way that we think and the way that we feel, and people just don't know about them. And so to see somebody, to have them sit there in front of you and go, I don't know what's happening, I know that I've got all of this potential inside of me, and yet I can't do it, and I feel like I'm broken, I feel like I'm defective. And these are not their own beliefs, not at all. They fully know that, they know they can do it. They believe they can do it. They're so determined. And yet society has conditioned them to believe, to feel that they are defective because they can't function the same way as everybody else. They can't use the resources that everybody else uses to get the same results. And I've had a number of clients come to me and they say, really, you're my last ditch attempt, because I've dropped all manner of money on coaches in the past, and we've worked hard together, but at the end of it all, I've not been able to produce the results that they've seen with their other clients, and they don't know why, and I don't know why. And I can't take any more of that. I'm just about to give up. And to see their faces when you turn around and say, pretty much all of my clients sit there and say exactly the same things, they're voicing the same concerns. And then I take them through this in-depth questioning, and it can be quite off-putting because I have a consultant qualification as well as a coaching qualification. If they've been to coaching before, they're quite used to the open-ended questions, the guidance to find their own answers. So to have very specific questions asked of them about the way that they think and the way that they feel and the way that they experience life is quite unusual for them, and it can be quite off-putting. But when they stick through it, they get to a point where they make such wonderful connections about how they experience the world and what that means for things like their productivity, and how many appointments they can book in during the week before they start to feel the effects of burnout. And the certain foods that they'd never even realized could cause an effect. They're identifying foods that cause them to feel like their heads are stuffed with cotton wool. And it is these very empowering decisions that you give people that allows them to not only have a sense of empowerment themselves, but it gives them the ability to have better relationships as well. So say you have a client and they have certain needs and they're not going to be met in your typical boardroom situation.
Mm-hmm.
And they walk into a meeting and they struggle to communicate, they fumble all over the place, they come out of it, and for 3 days they feel so burnt out from all the pressure of that meeting because their needs were not met. After this process, they have such a clear understanding of their needs that they walk into that boardroom and they say, just before we start, I need to let you know that, and they tell people what their needs are, whether it's a break halfway through, whether it's not to sit in the light, whether it's to make sure that they have chance to regularly clarify what's being said. And these seem like quite basic things, but we don't always think of them. We don't always know that we need to think of them because we are automatically conditioned to think we are just like everybody else.
Or that
Nobody likes to think that they need the, the special adjustments. But when we do advocate for ourselves, that sense of empowerment and confidence is second to none.
Yeah, I'd say that's one of the biggest things that I've been personally making changes on is setting boundaries.
Yeah.
Issues that I've had with corporate jobs, and anything that involves a scenario where you're expected to behave a certain way. I've had issues with the light shining in your face.
Yeah.
Fluorescent lights I've always had an issue with that give me headaches. Hard to focus. I had a job where I was doing perfectly fine. It was an IT job. I was doing data management, and I was kind of in a corner with some people, and it like a few people, and it was totally fine. But we moved to a new building, and they did an open floor plan, and I started to fall apart.
Yeah.
Within a few months, they let me go because I just wasn't performing very well. So now that I'm doing more of my own business stuff, I've been, we talked about this before we went on the air here, that I typically only take maybe one call a day or one call every other day, but today I've taken 3 calls. So after we're done here, I'm probably going to take a break and crash.
Absolutely.
Setting
And
those
it's wonderful. It is wonderful that you're able to do that because, it gives you that ability to say, okay, so tomorrow I've got 3 calls in the calendar. And then you're able to say the day after, I'm going to book nothing in there. In fact, what I do, I'm sure you probably do something similar, is I actually book the whole day out. If I've got calls, I'll book the whole next day out, possibly even the rest of the week, because I have that clearly defined in my head what my boundaries are. You're correct. And the way that we look at the 2 different sections of the self is I look at the functioning, and I look at the sense of self and the identity. And what that gives you is it gives you the differentiation between what you can't do and what you will not do when it comes to setting boundaries. Because if we're looking at something, if somebody's asking us to do something that goes against our values or our beliefs, that is I won't do that because it is something that you believe in so strongly. But when it comes to the functioning part of the human being, if we don't have a clear understanding of what we actually can't do, then we're going to try and make allowances for other people. And that's where people's boundaries, even if they're good with the beliefs and the values, they can blur the lines with what they can't do because they just simply don't have the clear understanding of the impact of the actions upon themselves. So accepting that you'll bake 3 dozen cookies for your children's bake sale for school tomorrow, it might be great because it aligns with your beliefs and values, but are you able to do that? Will your body and your mind, still be thriving at the end of that? Chances are not, but if you don't know for sure, you don't have a good understanding of it, that's where you're going to fall foul of burnout.
Yeah, I think many of us should continue to kind of test things, almost take a scientific approach to it. I'm sure it really depends on what type of a person you are, if you're a thinker versus a feeler type for example. Maybe you have to kind of do some more spiritual exploration versus cognitive exploration. Would you say that's true, or should people kind of allow themselves to scientifically experiment on how much they can handle in a certain situation, and then set the flag there and then define that? Because you don't know until you know, right?
Well, the process that I actually step people through is one that I call intentional transformation. And what it does is, it's very much like, and I can't use this in my branding because it would put everybody off, but it's very much like self-experimentation. But if you've ever been through the process of identifying allergens, it's a very similar process.
Right.
So what we would do, say I was coaching yourself, we would go through each of the functioning areas, the physical, the emotional, the cognitive, the communicative, and the sensory. And we would look at all of the little ways that people could vary in the way that they process things. We would identify things that maybe impact you negatively or positively. And then I'd show you how we go through a process of eliminating these things and then reintroducing these things over the course of a few weeks. And yes, it is an extremely slow process,
right,
simply because, there are so many different variations you can possibly have.
right.
But once you get quite attuned to doing this, it actually snowballs. And when you start making these little changes, so you might change up your diet a little bit, make a few tweaks here and there, but that might give you better thought clarity, which then has a better impact on your work, which then has a better impact on your finances, which then has a better impact on your emotional state.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very much like Darren Hardy's book, The Compound Effect. The tiny little changes that you make can actually add up to have massive impact on your life. So yeah, it is very much that little bit of, try a little bit here, try a little bit there.
Mm-hmm.
But what we do is we craft this this living document, and I call it living because it's not something that you would write out and you frame, you stick it on the wall, and that's it. It's solidified. Right. People change, things change, the world changes, how we feel and how we sense the environment around us changes.
Right.
And so this document is a living document because we go back to it constantly. We review it. If we're feeling burnt out, we look at it and we say, oh yeah, 6 months ago, I realized that this can lead to burnout and I completely forgot that. But instead of having to find that all out again, it's all written down there for you. And that really is quite powerful in itself.
That's all of that is amazing. I'm like zoned in. Real quick, can you go back over the what the 5 types were? I mentioned I heard communicative and sensory. What were the others again?
Yeah, so we've got sensory.
Mm-hmm.
We've got communicative.
Mm-hmm.
We've got physical.
Okay.
We've got cognitive.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, one of my own challenges that I have is actually from not having a really good memory. So I've forgotten the ones.
The emotional, I think, was the last. Was it emotional? Was the last one?
Just bear with me a second.
No, that's fine. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. I just wanted to ask. I wanted to have that as a lead-in to ask if there's any one of these that you feel is your strength and which would be your personal weakness.
Okay, let me just go over them again. The sensory, they've got cognitive, we've got emotional, we've got physical, that was the one I was missing out, and the communicative. Okay. I actually have, and I didn't mention this earlier, but one of the conditions that I live with is Aspergers syndrome.
Okay.
And to give you the perspective on how easy it is to miss these things, I got to the age of 36 and I had the challenges that I had in life, and my parents missed it, my teachers missed it, my lecturers missed it later in life, my GP missed it. And get this, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and my psychiatrist was also the lead autism consultant for the entire area, and even he missed it.
Wow.
So it was only by doing this work and realizing that actually I fall into this, you know, these specific sets of struggles, that I went to him, excuse me, and I presented to him this information, and he went, "Oh, how did I miss this?" So for me, sorry, excuse me, I'm quite a dry throat now. I don't normally talk this long.
No, take a moment, take a breather. No
That's
problem.
Okay. So my weaknesses, my challenges actually lie in communication and in sensory. So I have quite a lot of sensory challenges. I'm a sensory seeker for the most part with touch. And yet I also am avoidant with sensory input when it comes to visual and auditory, which means that I have to be very careful that I'm not working in a busy or cluttered environment with a lot of noise. But also, if I have had a particularly stressful day, my house is now like a plushie factory. It's covered in soft blankets, it's covered in little fluffy toys everywhere. And you know what? Even though I'm a coach, an international coach, and I go on my Instagram and I'm quite happy to show that I have plushies in my house, because that is me. And I have no shame in being me. And I have no shame in meeting all of my needs. And I don't believe that anybody should feel shamed for meeting their needs. Now, my strengths are actually cognitive. Although I do have some of the typical challenges that go with Asperger's, I do have the unique ability to simultaneously see both the bigger picture of a situation and all the tiny, every single little pieces of the jigsaw that fit together at once, which makes me an excellent problem solver.
I'm smiling because I'm the exact same.
Yeah, I'm a visual thinker as well. There's two types of thinkers. You may have come across learning styles. I don't necessarily buy into learning styles, but thinkers, there are visual thinkers and there are verbal thinkers. And I'm a full-on visual thinker. So if I'm thinking of a concept and somebody comes along and says, "Hey, what you're thinking about?" You're lucky if you get a sentence out of me. You'll just get random words, because I haven't got the time to string it together into like what to me is another language.
Right.
Okay. And so I visualize things really well, which also aids me in problem solving. And a really unique quirk I have is dual processing, which is actually holding two thoughts at one time. And so I can be reading to my children of an evening, and my mind can wander off and plan the entire content of my social media for the next, 30 days. And yet I don't skip a beat. And I use all of the emotional infliction needed in the story with my children. And it can be a blessing, but when you get into sleep at night and, you're trying to dream off into a peaceful sleep, and the other part of your brain's off there trying to solve the mysteries of the universe, it can be really annoying.
Yeah, I can relate to much of that. And even the same with communication and sensory stuff is also what I would call my weakness. So I might have to do some personal exploration. But, it certainly feels like, especially with the cognitive stuff, while there are some amazing gifts that come with it, it does feel like a gift. It does feel like this ability, like you said, the ability to kind of see the big picture and the minute details at the same time feels kind of incredible sometimes. Feels like it sets you apart from the human race.
It is, and it's tapping into that. I mean, a lot of people, and a lot of it is mindset and conditioning, but we're accustomed to looking at our struggles and not being able to sort of see the bigger picture when it comes to how we work as humans. And so we tend to get stuck in thinking, oh wow, I really struggle with the emotional side of things, or I'm not a very good communicator, or I feel really burnt out, or my physical state is a mess. But when you realize that they're often offset by quite significant strengths as well. It's
Mm-hmm.
honing into those strengths. And that's how we balance this process. We don't just say, hey, look, here's a big document of all the weaknesses and the challenges that you've got.
Right.
And there you go, bye-bye. We actually go through, your significant strengths. And we don't just leave it at that either. We look at how you can capitalize on that. Because at the end of the day, you can have your dreams and your goals. But if the path that you take to get to your dreams and goals isn't aligned with your strengths and doesn't sort of take into account your challenges, it's not going to feel amazing getting to that wonderful achievement at the end of the road.
Yeah, it's not faking it till you make it, but defining how you can do it. I did have I had a question and I lost it.
I do that.
Yeah, that happens to me all the time. Have you used any Myers-Briggs research in any of the stuff that you do, or is that relevant at all?
Well, I don't tend to. I used it in my early days when I was trying to do the personal exploration.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you that I baffled myself really well with that. I don't know if it's part of being bipolar, and I don't know if it's part of being a woman with extreme, PMS. But I actually fluctuate between an INFP and an INFJ.
Okay.
Depending on various factors. But I feel like the tendency can be to focus on protocols and blueprints and methods. And you kind of get stuck in this way of thinking of, okay, you're just segregating people into different types of boxes. And although it does go a great deal further than a lot of other methods at tearing apart, who we really are and how we work, it still puts people in that danger zone of assuming that because this has worked for another INFP, it should work for me. And when it doesn't, their emotional well-being will take a hit.
Right.
Does that make sense?
No, it totally does. I think that's something that I've been exploring more so lately, personally, and I'm talking to people about that and actually doing a little bit of coaching based on it, which is why I ask, because I bring it up and I brought it up in some conversations. It's helped some people, and some people are a little bit confused about certain things.
I'll tell you, if I can just give you a little nugget here. I noticed you've talked about the Enneagram before.
Yes, I briefly,
I'm a type 5 on the Enneagram. And just as a little experiment, being in some groups with Aspergers women, I popped into 2 different groups. One was your average group of just women, and the other was a group of Asperger's women. And I said, hey, here's the Enneagram test. It's a bit like a personality test. See what you get and post the answers under this comment. And the general group of women, they were all over. We had 9s, 7s, we had 3s, we had 4s. It was a big mix.
Right.
The Asperger's group, they were nearly, I'd say 90% of them were either type 5 or type 6.
Right.
There was no variation from that at all. And so I find it quite interesting how these ancient almost systems can mirror up with modern diagnoses.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Enneagrams I've had some trickiness with consistency, like you were saying. They're like all over the place. But I've also found that INTPs, which are often, which is my type, and the type that's often confused for having some cognitive mental disabilities, tend to fall into 5, or I personally fall into 7 because I've got other bipolar mental health issues that I think are attributing to that. But yeah, I think that's interesting. But when I talk to people about Myers-Briggs stuff, I tend to like to go into the Jungian functions. And I think that kind of helps people break things down a little bit more specifically. Through our conversation, I got the impression that you're more of an INFP because you like to help specific people, and it's kind of for your journey and not just about some grand vision of the world per se. But I think it's great that, the point that I do when I help people is to try to let them know that this isn't like a box that you live in, just like everything else. It's not a means to just say, this is who you are, you can't be something different. But it's just kind of like a way to prompt yourself to like, to learn a little bit more about you, so you can, think about how it applies to your life, and learn how to go forth with that. Kind of like, dare I say, like how your living document exists as something that you're continuously taking notes about who you are, and your past, your present, and where you'd like to be, and making those comparisons. It's like a way to just prompt yourself as to like how you're feeling and where you should go. If that makes
Absolutely. And if you think about it, Christian, you really, the only thing that life is it's one being, one soul, however you believe life is.
Right.
It's one soul experiencing the universe through our senses. Now, so
Right.
why wouldn't you want to make that experience as optimal as possible?
Yep.
And what way is it better to do that than to fully understand who you are? And the Myers-Briggs types are wonderful for taking that first step. It's a great, introduction into that first step.
Yep.
And it's just wonderful to see people move on and make these connections that really deep diving into self-discovery can make.
Absolutely. I had one last question. You briefly mentioned a bit earlier in the podcast about how you were self-identifying, or loosely identifying as the role of, essentially the role of being a woman as opposed to being an individual. If that makes sense, that you were just a wife, you were a daughter, you were a mother, etc.
Yeah.
How do you feel that's shaped your growth and perspective in this, or something you can speak to about women, focusing more on their individuality as opposed to, again, fitting into these boxes? If that makes
Absolutely. I think we are really, as women, specifically brought up to fill those roles. And it can feel almost like you're letting people down if you don't do them very well. And I'm divorced, so I didn't do that very well in the first instance, at least. And my mother was constantly, bless her, even after she had a stroke, she was on my case because I am useless at housework. So I do not by any means fit the perfect housewife/wife/mother picture. And yet, once I got over that understanding of that is essentially who I am, and I did the deep diving, and it was, and I think it's strange as well, Christian, because when you don't tap into that, and when you're first starting your discovery journey, you see these memes that people throw about, and you're like, oh, wow, yeah, this burning passion inside, and you're this badass, and it's like it goes in, but you don't feel it, or it's like you can't understand it so well. But really, that is what happens. You just become this like self-autonomous. You don't need anybody else in your life, because you are this like single functioning person. You know who you are. You could be the last person on earth, and you have full faith that you will function, you will survive, you know what you need. You don't need anybody else. And that is powerful in its own right, because then you go on to choose who you want in your life, and you choose to take people out of your life who do not, adhere to your boundaries, who do not, you attract people who share your values and your beliefs and your attitudes. And you find groups of people who share your passions and your interests and your preferences. And your life becomes this wonderful, enriched feeling that you really do feel like at times you're just going to explode with like this fluffy joy thing, and it infects everybody around you. But it's and don't get me wrong, it's not that I don't have those days where one of my functioning areas has been annoying and like really playing up. It's throwing a tantrum. And I wake up and I'm in pain, like from the minute I open my eyes through the physical issues I've got going on. Or I wake up and I want to, it's like, oh, you're breathing, go away. Your emotions are OTT. Or you wake up and you're like, why have I put my keys in the freezer, man? What's wrong with my brain? I have those days, but the difference is I no longer beat myself up about them. I know exactly what I need to do. I need to reschedule my calendar, or I need to go and do nothing but lay on the bed with the soft duvet, or, I know what to do to get over it. And I know how to, heal that area of well-being that is not having its needs met.
Fantastic. I mean, there's a lot of beauty in women that the world needs to see more often beyond the roles that we're trying to define for them. And I want to see more of it. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a great place to end. I hope we can have you back in the future for some future talks, because there's plenty of other things we'd like to chat about. I wanted to ask questions about like food and how that affects people. So maybe we can come back and have an episode dedicated to that. If you'd love to do that, we can talk about it after the show.
That would be wonderful.
Why don't you give everyone a sense of where they can get a hold of you and find out about where they can, get in contact with you.
Absolutely. Well, you can get a hold of me on my website, which is victoriateasdale.co.uk, or you can find me on Facebook or Instagram. I've tried doing the Twitter thing, but I'm not as hip as the millennials. So,
it's a weird platform.
Yeah.
Nobody really knows what to do with it.
No. I moan. Mostly I moan at companies, but
Yeah, I do that too. Or if I have like weird little jokes or quirks, I just throw it on Twitter because I don't know where else to put it.
Personality, that's what we like.
Yep, basically. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. This was a really great chat. I think a lot of people will get a lot out of it. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Great. All right. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Hey, you beautiful human. Thanks for listening to Dopamine. I really appreciate it. If you thought this was a dope show, then you should wait until next week. But also, while you wait, you should go to iTunes and Stitcher and leave a positive review. Positive reviews help me to fill up my dopamine tank. Otherwise, you can send your friends to dopamine.life to listen to the show, or hi, my name is Christian.com to get the latest updates. I'll catch you later.
Baby, I'm a fiend. Oh, you got me going off your dopamine. All I need is for you to put me on to the recipe. Yeah. Ooh, purple flowers, candy showers in the air. You dance for hours as I watch from overhead. It's a my thing. You got me going off your dopamine. Yeah, it's a my thing. You got me going off your dopamine.
Hey everybody, this week's sponsor are my friends over at imprinteasy.com. If you go to imprinteasy.com/dope and sign up for the thing on the page, you can get a free pen, and it's lovely. They are known for great effective printing and branding solutions, so go check them out.
The podcast you just heard was recorded with Anchor. If you want to make your own, download the Android or iOS app completely free from anchor.fm/podcast. That's anchor.fm/podcast.